Texas back in 2005. While we lived there, we were members and attended First Community Church, which is an awesome church, and we had a great church experience there. It's very mission-orientated, and it continues to be today. Ed Middleton is the pastor, and his sermons had the potential to blow my mind. And the first time I realized this was over the first All Saints Day that we were there. Now, my first clue when I walked in that something different was coming was finding a jazz band instead of the regular piano. My second clue was during the children's sermon when he called me a saint. Sermon was very intriguing. I still like to think about it. The worship service ended with being encouraged to dance around the sanctuary, singing "When the Saints Come Marching In." Now, I don't know about you, but for me, when I think of All Saints Day, I think Catholic. And my impression was that saints were these perfect people who had done extraordinary things, and there was no hope that I could ever do a tenth of what they had done. And as I've studied and learned, what I found is that it's the Catholic's tradition, way of celebrating people who were human and made mistakes, and yet during their life achieved the mission of loving God with all of their hearts. And I love how coincidence and God works by what we have here today. Because Mission 1 started on All Saints Day. And today's scriptures are about justice from Amos and Matthew. Now, in case you don't know, Mission 1 is a national effort that one united church on a shared mission for 11 powerful days to feed the hungry and confront food-related injustice on behalf of our denomination, the United Church of Christ. The goal is that we have over 1 million healthy food donated, over 11,111 letters mailed to Congress, over $111,111 donated to hunger-related ministries, over $111,111 donated to the East African Famine Relief. Now, for me, mission is critical to what we do, because it's what we're called to do and what God calls us to do in caring for the least of these. One of the reasons why I love the United Church of Christ is it stands up for those with little to no voice. And with Mission 1 in the back of our minds, let's take a look at Scripture. In Amos chapter 5, verses 21 through 24. It's right in the middle of where he's telling Israel how they have sinned. I despise your festivals. I take no delight in your solemn assemblies. Take away from me the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the melodies of your harps. But let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. All of these are very harsh and cold words, and I almost get the shivers when it gets to the waters. Now, especially in this area, we think of floodwaters that we've seen over the years. In 1993, there was a joint United Church of Christ General Synod and Christian Church Disciple of Christ Assembly, where at the time, UCC President Paul Sherry and the keynote speaker, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, joined thousands of area residents and church volunteers in sandbagging. And while at times water can be nice and meditative, we think of it for baptism. It also has the imagery of being very harsh and destructive and a killer. In Matthew 25, verses 1 through 13, we have the parable of the bridesmaid, where over half of them had missed going with the bridegroom when he arrived. They were shut out of the wedding banquet and then denied their previous association. Now, many have used the scripture to warn of being ready for Jesus' return. And with that, I think about how the people in Jesus' time thought of him. They were looking for his return. They thought, in terms of him coming back, it was going to be a matter of years, not a matter of millennium. You might remember last May, Family Radio Network preacher Harold Camping predicted that the last day of the world and the apocalypse was going to be on the 21st. For me, I don't put emphasis on that because I believe that we have no reason to worry about the apocalypse unless we're doing something wrong as it is. If we're doing what we should be, why should we worry? And when I think about this scripture, what I get so uncomfortable with is the lack of grace. And so often Jesus turns a parable into a lesson of grace. And he doesn't hear. No matter how long I wait, and I wait, and I wait some more. Instead, this is a parable about justice, where the bridesmaid have to suffer being left out because they were too foolish. Me personally, I'm an optimist. I like looking at the glass half full, not half empty. At one point in my life, I had the nickname of Rosanna Dana. So it's hard for me to look at these two scriptures that are full of harsh justice and then preach about it. I can't help myself. I have to look for the good news. I have to look for the grace. And today I find it with Mission 1. If we want to get caught up like Harold Camping did in the end times, okay. You can focus on where are the signs? When will it happen? What day? What hour? What minute? For me, I can't help but question, how did he reach out to God's children who are in need today? How did he feed the hungry? Heal the sick? Because isn't that what Jesus calls us to do? Mission 1 is about knowing that God is with us throughout all of our life, guiding us, watching over us, giving us faith that we will one day end our journey here and end up in heaven. Mission 1 is about sharing God's love, justice, and compassion with people who so desperately need it. More than 1.5 billion people live in this world in extreme poverty. They live on less than $1.25 a day. 16% of people who live in developing countries suffer from chronic hunger and starvation. Studies show hunger is the biggest factor in the instability of governments that turns to violence and unrest and then to war throughout countries around the globe. Mission 1 is about speaking prophetically in a single loud voice from across the United Church of Christ, saying that God's will for our world is that no one should be denied adequate nutrition. And this leads me back to All Saints' Day. A day of lifting up people who have loved God with all of their hearts and celebrating their stories. I think of the dozen people who ran out into the streets and together picked up a 4,000-pound car to pull Brandon Wright from beneath it after his motorcycle had crashed and burst into flames. They saved his life. Articles written about this have even referred to them as Good Samaritans. Isn't that what our church is trying to do through Mission 1? Something that individually would be about impossible, yet together, something extraordinary that we can achieve. In our tradition, in the United Church of Christ, everyone who is a member of the church is a saint and has a direct access to God. As saints, we have been gifted with visions of God's heart. When we are truly being saintly, we find ways to pass on what we know about God to other people around us, and we share God's grace and love freely. So, I ask you, the saints of St. Paul United Church of Christ, who are you sharing God's love, grace, and compassion with today? Amen.